Let's dive right into this explainer. So I want you to completely rethink your environmental management system. Don't picture it as some dry, thick manual gathering dust on a shelf. Instead, I want you to imagine it as a dynamic, glowing facility map. Picture a lead auditor leaning over this map, watching these bright, glowing lines of your physical and operational boundaries actually light up. And then watch how those glowing lines transition perfectly into a formally documented scope statement, because that's exactly what we're talking about today. This is the blueprint that defines your organizational limits and dictates your company's true ecological footprint.
It really brings up a fascinating question, doesn't it? Where does a company's environmental responsibility actually end? I mean, it's super easy to look at a sparkling corporate headquarters and think, well, that's the whole story. But what about the messy, polluting realities of an outsourced supply chain? Or maybe a shared contractor facility? Where exactly do we draw that line?
Well, to figure that out, we have to look at what's called the EMS scope. Under the ISO 14001:2026 standard, your EMS scope represents the physical, organizational, operational, and functional boundaries that determine where your system actually applies. Basically, it's the formal documentation that takes those glowing boundary lines on our metaphorical map and turns them into a legally auditable commitment. It literally defines your exact organizational limits.
So, here's our map legend for today. We're going to put on our lead auditor hats and inspect this territory. First, we'll map the EMS boundaries. Second, we'll look at the danger of artificial exclusions. Third, integrating the business processes. Fourth, pinpointing significant environmental aspects. And finally, setting measurable action plans. All right, let's start with part 1, mapping the EMS boundaries.
Let's watch those glowing boundaries light up on our organizational map. The standard actually outlines 4 totally distinct types of lines you need to draw on your blueprint. You've got physical, so your actual buildings and geographic sites; organizational, which means departments or joint ventures; operational, covering the actual manufacturing and logistics; and functional, which includes things like strategic planning and procurement. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is that your boundaries aren't just brick and mortar walls. They include your corporate decision-making structures too.
Now, context is literally everything here. Clause 4.3 of the standard demands that your scope reflects reality. So, if a chemical plant is mapping its high-risk boundaries, we're talking hazardous waste and air emissions, that map is going to look vastly different from a corporate IT firm that's just mapping its server energy use. Your scope simply cannot be a generic template. It has to be tailored to your unique context.
Moving on to part 2, the danger of artificial exclusions.
You know, auditors are constantly looking for what happens in the dark red zones that sit just outside your official borders. Are companies trying to hide their dirtiest operations right off the map? Let's look at the difference here. A justified exclusion might be a subcontractor's internal operations, specifically where you have absolutely zero operational control. Totally fair. But an unjustified exclusion? That's when you intentionally leave out an outsourced high-emission logistics fleet just to make your audit easier, even though you are the one dictating their routes and fuel requirements.
Get this, here's a real-world nonconformance straight from our source material. There was a metal fabrication company that happily included its machining operations in its scope, but suspiciously excluded its highly polluting surface coating facility. And guess what? It was located in the exact same complex. They actually tried to claim it was under a separate management structure just to dodge the solvent emission audits. As an auditor, I'm telling you, that is a massive red flag. It is a direct nonconformance because that environmental impact was huge and clearly influenced by corporate policy. No way you can hide that.
Okay, on to part 3, integrating the business processes. Once those glowing boundaries are verified, we actually have to step inside them. We have to make sure the system isn't just some empty shell. Clause 4.4 states it perfectly. It says, environmental management systems are not intended to operate as isolated administrative mechanisms. So basically, environmental responsibility cannot be locked away in some powerless, isolated back-office department. It literally has to be the lifeblood of the organization. And what that means in practice is injecting environmental awareness into every single corner of your map. It has to weave into your daily workflows. We're talking strategic planning up in the boardroom. We're talking strict supplier selection criteria in procurement, route optimization in logistics, right on down to the daily operations on the factory floor and the training requirements enforced by HR. Because, listen, if you give an environmental manager all these grand responsibilities but absolutely zero decision-making power to, say, change a toxic procurement process or halt a non-compliant production line, you know what happens?
The whole system just generates systemic nonconformances. True integration requires actual, real-world authority. Let's jump to part 4, pinpointing significant environmental aspects. Now we're going to zoom way into our map grid, down to the exact coordinates where your company physically interacts with the Earth. Clause 6.1 requires us to distinguish between aspects and impacts, and this is vital. The aspect is your organizational action or interaction, like discharging wastewater from a cooling tower. The impact, on the other hand, is the ecological consequence of that action, like polluting a local river. Nailing down this direct cause and effect link is your foundational analytical step.
And I think it's just incredibly impressive how ISO 14001:2026 forces organizations to adopt a full life cycle perspective. You have to look way, way beyond your physical fences. You have to trace impacts upstream and downstream. You're mapping raw material extraction, component manufacturing, product distribution, how the consumer actually uses your product, and finally, end-of-life disposal. It is a huge, expansive view of your responsibility. Which brings us to our final step, part 5, setting measurable action plans. So this is where we translate all those mapped hazards into an ironclad plan of attack. Because let's face it, identifying a problem is entirely useless if you don't have a structured solution. Clause 6.2 lays out a highly logical flow. Step 1, you identify the aspect. Step 2, determine its significance and risk. Step 3, set a strictly measurable objective. And step 4, create a trackable action plan that specifies exactly what will be done, who is responsible, and exactly when they're going to finish it. When you look at an ISO 14001 objectives matrix, you immediately see the level of accountability and traceability that a lead auditor demands to see inside your boundaries. Look at how wonderfully specific this is. For high energy consumption, the objective isn't just some fluffy desire to use less energy. No way. It's explicitly a 12% reduction in 12 months, backed up by actual equipment optimization and meter tracking. I really want to highlight that number 12. A 12% reduction target, that is auditable. A vague promise to just do better or be greener next year, that is an automatic audit failure for sure. Measurability is absolutely everything when you are translating corporate policy into genuine environmental performance. So as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. I want you to look at your own corporate map. Are your organizational boundaries designed for genuine environmental protection, or are they just drawn for audit convenience? Because at the end of the day, true sustainability starts exactly where those lines are drawn. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into EMS scoping.